UFO Bombshell claim, stunning U.S. Navy sightings are most important in the last 70 years. Well, it's not just the U.S. that has sighted them, it's also UK, Canada, Puerto Rico, Mexico, which is UFO Alley as we know, and they've also recorded them on infrared radar images. This is by Kieran McGrath of Express UK. This stunning footage of the unidentified flying objects flying at hypersonic speeds with no visible means of propulsion was released by the US Navy earlier this year. They're the most important evidence of the existence of what we know as being UFOs in the past 70 years, and is proof that they exist, that they're real. This is what a ufologist has recently said. Several US Navy aviators, the pilots that were on training, came forward in May with the permission of the US Department of Defense in order to report UFO sightings during their training missions, usually off the coasts, west and east coast. And they're suggesting that they have seen these strange objects over the east coast of the US between 2014 and 15. The Navy pilots claim that the UFOs were also able to stop quickly, turn suddenly, even against all odds, and declassified footage shows one such object hurtling rapidly across the sea at these hypersonic speeds. This is, of course, technology that humans do not have right now. James Abbott, who has just published the second volume of his series, The Outsider's Guide to UFOs, said he was both intrigued and excited by all these revelations. He said the US Navy sightings are arguably the most important encounters with unidentified objects in the last 70 years. But I'm sure that if he goes into other countries, he's going to find just as many recordings, images, and videos. Now, he says they are important not simply because they were recorded on advanced sensors, but because the U.S. Department of Defense agreed to release those and other similar recordings and gave the pilots permission to speak to the press about them. The released recordings, and there may be more, span the period from 2004 to 2018, and they show some very strange objects. Abbott said the footage had been released from late 2018 onwards, with the main witnesses from one similar encounter in 2004 giving detailed interviews in which he voiced his wish to fly in one of those, quote unquote. He said the more recent recordings from the US East Coast not only show similar objects, but the two pilots who were prepared to go on public record gave this stunning evidence. One said that he once had an object clearly on his advanced sensors, but was completely unable to see it with his own eyes. Such sightings are now nothing new. Abbott said in 1952, the U.S. Air Force had allowed pilots involved in the famous series of UFO encounters, commonly referred to as the Washington Flap, quote unquote, to give a series of press interviews. But the U.S. government rapidly stepped in to put a stop to any publicity of all this. Abbott said, so the recent revelations by the Department of Defense, and even more recent decision by the U.S. Navy to make it easier for Navy pilots to report unidentified objects, seem to be part of a sea change in official attitudes towards the subject. Sea change in that SEA. No one is claiming extraterrestrials, but the official approach now appears to be that there is something unexplained there, and it's necessary, without jumping to unjustified conclusions, to gather more evidence on this. He says, my own conclusions, therefore, are that the sensor evidence shows that something is definitely causing highly trained pilots and their electronic sensors to see things that, according to our current understanding of science and aerodynamics, simply cannot be. Set that evidence alongside the mountains of other witness testimony from very credible people, and one has to conclude that UFOs are a proven phenomenon. They may be lots of different things. Here and now, in 2019, we finally know for sure that they are there. Everyone is searching for the holy grail of UFO studies, the solid gold piece of evidence that is absolutely incontrovertible. For UFOs, we have a huge amount of evidence and one or two pieces which look like golden nuggets, like the US Navy evidence. Taken together, the evidence is so strong that there is now almost no remaining doubt that the phenomenon does exist, end quote. Now, as to what they actually are, Abbott has yet to draw any firm conclusions. He said there's no single piece of evidence that is sufficiently compelling to prove extraterrestrial involvement. He says the only possible connections are those involving so-called experiences and abductees, and very few are well corroborated. He says there is a certain amount of circumstantial evidence through some of the better researched abductions, but even if we could be certain that some sort of outside force was involved, it may not necessarily be extraterrestrials. There's quite a gulf between knowing that there is a phenomenon which needs explaining to being able to conclusively explain it, end quote. Abbott goes on to use examples of meteorites to illustrate the way science sometimes lags behind reality. He said the issue of rocks which fell, burning from the sky, was a phenomenon which science derided for many centuries. Scientists could not understand how a rock could get up there in the first place, let alone explain how it caught fire and fell back to earth. The ordinary people who saw such things could point to the rocks on the ground, tending to keep quiet about the whole thing for fear of the same sort of ridicule which beset UFO witnesses. It was in the late 18th century before science finally caught up and explained the whole thing as meteorites. So we are now at the point of accepting that the UFO phenomenon does exist, but whether it is a result of natural forces, time travelers, interdimensional travelers, or extraterrestrials has yet to be seen. And he says, my starting point has always been the recognition that there are a lot of intelligent people out there who would like to know more about the subject of UFOs, but who shy away from the "my grandmother was an alien" side of the topic. More specifically, they have a natural aversion to people who claim they know the answers and that everything is definitely about little gray men and interstellar spacecraft such as flying saucers. Now we know that one of the very credible ex-ministers, the Defense Minister of Canada, Paul Hellyer, who is still alive by the way, has for years been lecturing on the fact that they have evidence, the Canadians that is, of extraterrestrials and ETs and UFOs and their ET spacecraft and ET advanced technologies. He says a lot of these ETs look like humans. Now you can go and find his various lectures on the internet if you wish, but he's just one example of the people that have been going out for years, for decades, trying to disclose this. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.